South Carolina State Infrastructure Transportation Bank has approved an amendment agreement to continuing to provide funds to finish 526. In this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, I sit down exclusively with the Coastal Conservation League's founder, Dana Beach, one-on-one. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. And listen to this interview later on iHeartRadio. Dana Beach, it's so good to see you again, and Happy New Year to you.
Thank you, Quintin. Same to you.
I have to start off with some breaking news. And this is coming from Live by News police reporter Art Jacobs. He reported this on Twitter just a few hours ago at 12:18. He says this, quote, "Breaking. The Infrastructure Bank Board approves an amended agreement to provide funds to finish I-526 across James and Johns Islands. Florence State Senator, that is, Hugh Leverman, and one other member voted no." I'm going to break that down for a couple of reasons. First, the amendment agreement. What is that agreement when you defined it?
Well, it's what they call is the intergovernmental agreement, and it's an agreement that is signed by three parties: the State Infrastructure Bank, Charleston County, and the state and the DOT. And basically, what it does is it lays out the responsibilities of each party in building the extension of I-526 from its current terminus at Highway 17 across the Stono, and then to Johns Island, and then back across the Stono to James Island, where it will eventually intersect and connect with the James Island connector. So that's the basic document that they have signed, and in the case of Charles, for all of us, we're the taxpayers. So they, as our representatives, have made certain commitments of financial resources and commitments to produce a certain product, and that's just basically what they signed. And we weren't surprised to hear it. You know, we knew because the last time the Infrastructure Bank met, they reversed themselves in their decision to essentially wind the project down. And they did that because as we know, Governor McMaster called his appointees, John White, who's the chairman, and I should remember who the other one is, but they had both voted against the project the first time and voted to wind it down because of the county's lack of ability to come up with additional funds to complete it. Now they have now changed their point of view again, and you know, it's interesting, and if you follow this, it's really a fascinating history because this project has gone back and forth like a windshield wiper for the past decade and almost a decade and a half now, with approvals, reversals, approvals, reversals, approvals, reversals, and now here we are in what we call an approval stage. But there's no guarantee that things won't change.
You had talked about that approval stage, that is. Does Charleston County, in your mind, still have enough money to finish 526?
Well, that's the key. They don't have it. They have no more money than they had the last time or the time before that. And that was what the bank wanted them to provide evidence for, that they could pay for the rest of it. You know, the current projection, and it's not current, it's 3 years old, is that the project will cost $725 million. That, by the way, just so people understand it, is the most expensive highway project that's ever been built in the state of South Carolina. The Infrastructure Bank funding is $420 billion. That's a million, sorry.
Yes, sir.
Thinking about Washington.
Okay.
The 420 was the commitment they made over a decade ago, and of that, about somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 has already been spent on right-of-way and permitting and analysis, that sort of thing. So they're over $300 million short, even if there's no escalation in price from the 3 year ago estimate. And most people, I think, who follow construction and this sort of thing believe that it's probably more expensive now than it was 3 years ago.
How expensive is it now?
Well, I think if you, again, just extrapolating cost of living, cost of materials increases, it could be, just to make a ballpark guesstimate, in the neighborhood of $800 million now. So it went from 420 up to 5, up to 6, up to 725, and it's probably in that, it certainly is reasonable to say it's probably 800. But that's one of the things that interestingly, the CIB and the DOT and the county didn't bother to do, which is to project what the current cost is. You know, that would be what an ordinary business transaction would call due diligence, and they failed to perform that due diligence on behalf of the taxpayers. So the short story is, we don't know how much it will cost. It could be 800 million, it could be 900 million, or it could still be 725.
You talk about that business transaction. What was that like in your mind?
Well, I think I'm glad I don't have stock in that business. But I do have stock in Charleston County, and it's the form of the taxes that we all pay, and whether they're property taxes or the various other sales taxes that go to the county. So I'm being a little facetious in saying I don't have stock in it. But it certainly, it was not conducted in a way that one would call thoughtful or thorough. It was yet another lurch in another direction, which has characterized the debate over this road for the last decade.
Let me go to some community reaction. Some people on Twitter are basically saying, hey, many people may have to go back and reread the language of the Charleston County's 2016 half-cent sales tax referendum bond. How would you reread it now?
Well, as I think many people, and probably that commenter remembers, the sales tax referendum, first of all, so we understand it, the ballot item did not stipulate which projects the money would be used to build. And so that was a point of contention among many people, including the Conservation League and others who objected to it for that reason. But they passed an ordinance that did identify the projects that it would be used for. And they very, very explicitly excluded 526. It was, not only was it not in the ordinance, but it was discussed at great length that it would not be in the ordinance, because the council felt that in order to make the most persuasive case they could to the voters to support the sales tax increase, they needed to leave that controversial project out. But now, I have to say, I don't know many people who follow this who are surprised at this latest permutation of the debate, because we've always felt, because we knew an ordinance can be changed and the referendum language could not be, that's why we wanted it in the referendum language and not in an ordinance. And so what they will have to do if they decide to spend money on 526, which they said they weren't going to do the first time, is to change the language of the ordinance and describe the projects and include 526 as one of those projects.
Then the question is this: who then allowed 526 to get into this particular referendum if it wasn't initially there?
Well, it was initially a somewhat open-ended, and initially I think some of the council members didn't like it, but some felt they wanted to be able to change it because they wanted to spend money on things they wanted to spend money on. You know, they didn't want to be bound by the language, and clearly they didn't want to. They chose not to because they did not include any of the language in the referendum. So I guess what I'm saying is that there were people on the council who I think thought, and I'm saying this like I listened to somebody in the back room. I didn't, but it's pretty clear from what they did that their desire was to have a pot of money they could use in some ways however they wanted to, including on 526. And so they purposely didn't include it legally in the referendum, but they included it they excluded it from the ordinance in order to make it look better to the voters who didn't like 526. And I think the bottom line on that is that if they use the money that they said they weren't going to on 526, that'd be a real breach of trust.
And let me get back to reaction. This is from Charleston County Council new chairman, Elliot Sumby. He says that they will get working on I-526 beginning in the morning.
Really? I mean, the building? Well, you know, Quintin, it's funny. I've been thinking about money a lot recently and what it does and doesn't do. And one thing, you know, we know money doesn't make you happy, but we do know that money reflects the values of a community. What we spend money on and how aggressively we promote it reflects what we believe is important in our communities. And when you think about it, we are now confronting in the city of Charleston alone a $2 billion flood abatement bill. We have projects identified that cost at least $2 billion, and that's only in the city of Charleston. That doesn't include Hanahan, it doesn't include Mount Pleasant, it doesn't include North Charleston. So we have a vast need to spend funding on public money on infrastructure to make sure that we survive as a region in the coming decades. At the moment, we don't have a tenth of that money. We have not, the political leaders, elected officials have not identified, they haven't been able to, a tenth of the money. We don't have $200 million toward a $2 billion bill. Meanwhile, and this is a little bit off the subject, but I have been thinking about it. Meanwhile, the State Public Service Commission just voted to transfer $2.3 billion from the South Carolina electric and gas ratepayers to the shareholders. They now also are Dominion shareholders when they agreed to let that lost additional 2.3 on top of the first $2 billion be recouped. And you know, the reason I mention these numbers is that these are huge numbers. You know, we're looking at $2.3 billion for the next chunk of the nuclear plant we're going to pay for. We're looking at now $800 million. That's creeping up on $1 billion for 526. But we've only come up with less than $200 million for flooding for the whole region. And I don't know anybody, at least I don't, maybe there are people out there like this, but I just haven't run into them, who believes that it is more important to build 8 miles of a bridge to Johns Island than to save this region from sinking into the Atlantic Ocean as the sea level rises. We're on the verge with the prospect of becoming the next Atlantis. We could be, you know, an artifact that archaeologists would study 500 years from now. What happened to Charleston? It sank. And we haven't come up with a fraction of the money to prevent that from happening. And so I say, what are the values that we're expressing in this region? What do we really care about? And it doesn't, to me, make sense. It doesn't speak well of our leadership. It doesn't look to the future. It doesn't express any positive vision. It's not a responsible way to spend money. And I think we've said all of this before, but I think when you put it in sharp focus now, this is a zero-sum game. There is only so much money that can be spent on infrastructure. It is not an expandable pot. It is what it is. And so every dollar that we spend on 526 is a dollar that is not spent on improving the flood circumstances here with respect to the transportation system. And most of the flooding is a problem of the transportation system. It's not, I mean, it's housing too, but it's Murray Boulevard, it's Lockwood, it's Highway 61, it's Bees Ferry, and so just to summarize, our values, we may say we believe in protecting our citizens from flooding, and we may say we may believe in maintaining a functional road system, but our actions don't really support that. What we really are saying is we believe in supporting development and developers on Johns Island at a magnitude of 20 times as much as we believe in the importance of dealing with flooding. That's a poor statement about us, I think.
And let me get back to Elliott Summey, because Charleston County will vote on the issue tonight at 5 p.m. And Chairman Elliott Summey said in Columbia, quote, "It is my intention that we will approve and execute this agreement this evening." So what else will you see from the County Council tonight?
Well, there's only so much they can do. I mean, they can approve the agreement, and the agreement basically says, now we're going to let you, the state, Civ and DOT will recommit the $420 million. It's no more than that. They didn't say we'll give you all of the money. They just said we'll give you what we agreed to give you 10 years ago. So there's no change in that. What the agreement that Elliott Summey is talking about approving puts the Charleston County taxpayer on the line to pay another $400 million in addition to, I mean, the CIV is already our money because that's where it comes from. But in addition to that, Elliott and others will be voting, if they do vote for this today or tomorrow, to obligate you and me and everybody else who lives and pays taxes in Charleston County to pay another $400 million for a road that really isn't necessary. That's what they'll be doing.
And then we get to the other side, obviously your side. Jason Crowley with the Coastal Conservation League wants to know how the county, that is, will pay for 526 and the other road improvement projects. He says the lead is looking at all options. What are those options in your mind?
Well, Jason is a very perceptive guy, and we're lucky to have him working on this, in my opinion. The options are, at this point, essentially ones that are political, because people need to understand a lot about this stuff that people seem to have forgotten. But one is that this project needs to have federal and state permits in hand before they can dig a spoonful of dirt. They only have done a draft environmental impact statement. That draft environmental impact statement is years out of date. It has to be redone. It has to be reinitiated by federal law. Give you another point of comparison, because we're all thinking about what's like what these days, The bus rapid transit system that we approved, and we did include that in the ordinance as part of the Hanson sales tax, we just found out is going to take 10 years to permit a bus. Now, I would ask any ordinary, common sense, possessed person, is it likely to take less time to permit 8 miles of bridges that will impact dozens and hundreds of acres of salt and freshwater wetlands and cost $800 million, by then more, that will cross county and city boundaries, that will radically transform the region? Is it going to take less time to permit that than it is a bus down Rivers Avenue? And I think the answer is probably not. So let's just say that even without any opposition, 526 permitting moved forward. And that's what Elliott is talking about doing. They will have to move forward with the permitting. Then they will have a long road ahead, so to speak, to get the approvals even to begin to build it, Now, I should also say that when you think about other projects in comparison, the new lane, 8/10 of a mile on Maybank Highway between the bridge and River Road, took 10 years to build. 10 years. to build one lane. So let's just look at the evidence, I guess I'd say, and just think, what does this mean for 526? It's 8 miles, brand new, freestanding bridge. It's not a bus lane down Rivers Avenue. It's not 1/8 of a mile long additional lane on Maybank Highway. Quintin, you will probably be around because you're a young, healthy guy, but if this thing were built, it went forward, and even if nobody opposed it, even if Jason and others choose not to exercise that option, which they won't choose, I think, this thing isn't going to be built in my lifetime. I mean, I'm 63 years old now, and it will not be built and finished and operational until probably the early part of the 2030 decade, right? So again, one has to ask the question, what are we buying ourselves? What are we buying? Is it traffic congestion relief right away? Are we going to be able to walk a baby carriage down Savannah Highway and down Folly Road next year, or even 2 years from now, or 3 years from now? No way that's going to happen. No way we'd be able to do that even if we could build it right away. But even if this thing is the magic bullet that it is presented to be by people who want to build it, and most of those people have property interest on Jones Island, it would not be operational for many years and past, in many cases, the lifetime of some of us. But the other options that are available are out there in the distant future, and those are appealing permits. You know, challenging a permit. If a wetland permit is granted, then the Conservation League or NICS 526 or any citizen can challenge that permit, and that means you have to go to court. You have to litigate it. Now, among the other things that the county agreed to do was to cover the legal cost. So we've now they've locked us in, and we have to, we keep electing these people, so we have a certain amount of responsibility here, to a minimum of, almost certainly $400 million construction cost, millions of dollars in permitting, engineering, and potentially legal fees. And the taxpayer of Charleston County will pay those things. We'll pay them in the form of sales tax. We have the highest sales tax in the state by far now. We'll pay it in the form of potentially higher property taxes. Wherever else they'll go, they haven't told us. We don't know how much it's going to cost. We don't know where the money's going to come from. All we know is that we're going to have to pay it. And that's a bad deal. I mean, when you think, I wouldn't buy a car if I didn't know how much it was going to cost and what my payment schedule was. And I wouldn't buy a car if I didn't know that it was going to get me from point A to point B. We're doing all of those things without knowing anything about 526. Its ultimate cost, its delivery schedule, anything. All we know is we have to pay it. And it's really, in some ways, even though I will say, in some ways it's even worse than this poor nuclear plant that got decommitted, abandoned in Columbia, because we knew what it was supposed to do. It's supposed to produce electricity. They just didn't know enough about the construction to build it properly, and they screwed it up. But in this case, and they knew where the money was going to come from. It was always going to come from the ratepayer, but the concept originally was that the ratepayer would get electricity in exchange for it, and now we're going to pay for it, but we aren't getting anything in exchange for it. In a way, it's sort of like 526, if we're going to pay for it, but we aren't getting anything in return. Literally aren't, and even if it were built, it wouldn't give us much of a return either in terms of congestion relief.
Dana Beach, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate this.
Well, thank you, Quintin. This is a fascinating, we are in an amazing state. We have amazing elected officials. Some of them are fantastic, and some of them make decisions you just have to scratch your head about.
And you talk about, obviously, fascination. Are you going to be running for mayor of Charleston?
I am not. I'm not. I'm hoping, though, that we'll have a great, vigorous debate about this and about flooding, and we'll have candidates who are out there really just, you know, shouting from the rafters about what our future should look like and can look like.
That candidate is who in your mind?
Well, I know that we've certainly, Mayor Tecklenburg is going to re-up, and I've been told, and I believe that Mike Seekins will run. I heard about Keith Waring, though I don't know anything about his current plans, but I don't know. You know, there's always a potential for a dark horse to come in, or, you know, that what happened. I remember when Mark Sanford ran for the first time, there were 9 people running, and nobody had ever heard of Mark Sanford. And interestingly, the candidate of choice that everybody knew was going to win was a guy named Van D. Hip, who was a nice guy. He was in the military. I worked with his sister, Lainey Hip. But Van kind of self-destructed, partly, but also Mark came out of nowhere. He presented a vision that people were pleased with, and they were excited about. And in some ways, we're in the same position now. I think we are in desperate need of someone who will articulate the future that we need to be striving for in this city and in this region. Right now, there is nothing. It's a void. It's a big negative dispute about a few little things and some big things like this. But there's no one articulating this positive vision. The Ronald Reagan's, you know, shining city on the hill. Where is it? We hope we're on a hill because the water's rising. If we're not on the hill, we're going to be in the water.
Thank you for your time.
Certainly.
Yes, sir.